So yeah, warm welcome to everyone. I think it's time we'll begin the meeting now. So I'll hand over who's going to chair it this evening.
Welcome everyone to this yearly anniversary meeting. This is the 145th anniversary of the founding of the Theosophical Movement on November 17, 1875. A couple of announcements before we proceed. There are regular Sunday meetings at this lodge, and all can attend, free of charge, of course. We have a Tuesday meeting on Skype as well, at the same time, in which we take up the Dhammapada and the Key to Theosophy. And Wednesday, same time, the Secret Doctrine class. And then the next Sunday meeting will be the second part of the Karma meeting, which we first had in August. So again, welcome everyone. And let me make a beginning by reading a couple of messages from other lodges who, of course, are having their meetings today as well. This from the Mumbai Lodge. Dear friends, we send you fraternal greetings and best wishes on the forthcoming auspicious occasion of the anniversary of the Theosophical Movement. Remembering these very inspiring words from Mr. Crosbie, which combine action and resignation. Quote, effective theosophical work cannot be done unless there are found persons in the world who can see the necessity for it and will fit themselves more and more to supply the need. The movement is accelerated by us to the extent we work with it, and hindered to the extent that we, as it were, let it pull us along. Every student who will strive to make himself a fitting instrument is necessary to the work, to his full capacity, soul, mind, and body. More power is needed. It will come if we will just open those big hearts of ours and let them work. And the Bombay Lodge will celebrate the occasion by holding a special meeting today, Sunday, November 15, with a talk on 3 objects. A further message from the town of Ahmedabad, the study group, where it was the home of Damodar Mavalankar. Many may know of him as having worked with the founders, H.P.B. in particular, and the Mahatmas in the original movement in India. He wrote quite a few articles, best known perhaps for his Diary of a Hindu Chela, which is really a correspondence between himself and William Quan Judge. Extraordinary human being for sure. The message says, thank you very much for your greetings and keep us updated with the activities carried out by your center at ULT London. We take this opportunity to greet all of you earnest friends on this auspicious occasion of ULT Foundation Day by our elder brothers and keepers of real wisdom with the help of H.P.B. and WQJ in 1875. 145 years ago. It is time for all of us to evaluate our way of working and where we have reached in working for the cause. We all have become part of divine design in present situation of the world. We can see people showing different sides of them, some positive, some negative, but we as students of Theosophy must hold on as observer of the great change to learn from the people and situations, reach out as many people possible to give them real teachings about law of karma and law of nature, which will soothe suffering humanity and help them to be more positive and hopeful for the brighter side waiting on the other side of the dark night. And this from fraternally yours, Sunanda, from the Ahmedabad study group, who's with us, I believe, this evening. So, this 145th anniversary meeting. On 17 November 1875, a movement was launched by a fraternity of Eastern adepts whose aim was to help mankind spiritually, ethically, and scientifically. Those interested in humanity are invited to attend and learn how the esoteric philosophy can and does help ideals directly as well as through the astral light, i.e., the psychic atmosphere that surrounds the Earth. Theosophical influences on the 21st century is the theme of this year's meeting. There will be 5 readings from the different writings of H.P.B, Judge, and Robert Crosbie, and also from the Mahatmas. And then there will be 2 talks as well. And let me remind everyone that there is a form which might be looked at that I've downloaded. It's at the top of the screen. It's called about the Dhyanis and November 17th, which was briefly posted earlier. I wanted to simply read quickly regarding Padmapani. This is from The Secret Doctrine, Volume 2, page 179. Padmapani, however, is the lotus bearer, symbolically only for the profane. Esoterically, it means the supporter of the kalpas, great cycles, the last of which, the present Mahakalpa, the Varaha, is called Padma, and represents 1/2 of the life of Brahma. Though a minor kalpa, it is called Maha, great, because it comprises the age in which Brahma sprang from the lotus. Theoretically, the kalpas are infinite, but practically, they are divided and subdivided in space and time, each division, down to the smallest, having its own dhyani or patron or regent. Padmapani of Avalokiteshvara becomes in China, in his female aspect, Kuan Yin, who assumes any form of pleasure in order to save mankind. The knowledge of the astrological aspect of the constellations on the respective quote-unquote birthdays of the dhyanis, Amitabha, the only tofu of China, included, for example, on the 19th day of the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the 11th month, and on the 7th day of the 3rd month, etc., etc. So let us think of these things today while we have our first reading.
This first reading is from the writings of William Q. Judge, and it's taken from chapter 4 of Notes on the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says, "This deathless yoga, this deep union, I taught Vivasvata, the Lord of Light. Vivasvata to Manu gave it. He to Ikshvaku. So passed it down the line of all my royal rishis. Then, with years, the truth grew dim and perished. Noble prince, now once again to thee it is declared. This ancient law, this mystery supreme, seeing I find thee votary and friend." Then William Judge writes, "Exoteric authorities agree that Vivasvata is the name for the sun, that after him came Manu, and his son was Ikshvaku. The latter founded the line of solar kings, who in early times in India were men of supreme knowledge. They were adepts, every one, and ruled the land as only adepts could, for the darker ages had not come on, and such great beings could naturally live among men. Everyone respected them, and there was no rebellion even in thought, since there could be no occasion for complaint. Although Vivasvata, as a name for the sun, reveals nothing to our Western ears, there is a great truth hidden behind it, just as today there is as great a mystery behind our solar orb. He was the being appointed to help and guide the race at its beginning. He had himself, ages before, gone through incarnation during other creations, and had mounted step by step up the long ladder of evolution until by natural right he had become as a god. The same process is going on today, preparing some being for similar work in ages to come. And it has gone on in the limitless past also, and always the Supreme Spirit, as Krishna, teaches the being, so that he may implant those ideas necessary for our salvation. Now we'll have the first talk on the cycle of avatars and teachers, 6th to 1st centuries BCE and in the 19th century.
Greetings everyone. If you can hear me clearly, I shall continue. I shall begin with a quote from Marcus Tullius Cicero, the great Roman Stoic statesman and philosopher. He wrote, "It is the duty of men, as of kings, to discover the truth. Humanity has never been without its guides, teachers, preceptors throughout history. What is called the wisdom tradition, or the deathless yoga, has always existed in the world in one form or another, under one name or another, from the great epochs of Lemuria and Atlantis to the present time, from the very beginnings of man as a self-conscious being. There has always been a school of masters, a line of great superhuman teachers, beginning with Krishna, who represents the Supreme Spirit, who taught Vivasvata, the Lord of Light. He passed it on to Manu, he to Ikshvaku, and down the whole line of royal rishis or adepts, also described as the inspired ones, or solar kings, who were men of superior knowledge, who ruled the land as only adepts could. At that time, such great beings could live naturally among men. This was a golden age for humanity, who abided by the precepts that were taught them. The teachings place the origin of these solar mysteries in the sun. The name Vivasvata is also a name for the sun. Much later, in the epoch of the Mahabharata, around 5000 BC, Krishna, or a ray of the Supreme Spirit, incarnated as Krishna, who is described as an avatar of Vishnu, the savior of the Indian tradition and their most popular god. His mission or goal was to restore and redefine the teachings and principles of yoga, of the yoga philosophy. His death marked the beginning of the Kali Yuga, the dark or Iron Age, the last and shortest of the four great ages, or Mahayuga, which lasts 4.321 million years. But every epoch, every new age requires a new world teacher, a teacher of humanity, in order to renew and revive the truth, which over time inevitably becomes distorted, faded, or is even lost in succeeding dark ages. There is a periodical cycle of avatars, of special incarnations of the world spirit in man, as seen in the case of all the world's great religious reformers. These great Mahatmas, or great souls, or Buddhas, are universal and common property. And it's said that even as with Manu and Vyasa in India, Zarathustra in Persia, these are generic names for a whole line of dynasty of great reformers and lawgivers, rather than single individualities. As Krishna put it in the Bhagavad Gita, whenever evil overtakes the world and men cry out for salvation, I incarnate myself in human form for the rescue and relief of humanity. Around the start of each zodiacal or historical age, there is a coming of world teachers to guide and inspire humanity in the coming age. A zodiacal or historical age lasts approximately 2,155 years, which is exactly 1/12 of a sidereal year of 26,000 years, which is the great cycle of the progression of the equinoxes, or the rotation of the sun and the solar system through the whole circle of the signs of the zodiac. The Buddha, Pythagoras, Plato, Lao Tse, and Shankaracharya and Patanjali all appeared around the 6th century BC in their respective countries. Patanjali appeared slightly earlier than these others, but I include him because he's quite important as the others. They all appeared principally to introduce a new impulse into the polytheistic religions of the time, namely the concept of a man's individual responsibility for his own actions, his own duties and behavior, and power of destiny, as opposed to the dependence on the power of the gods and fate. They came as reformers, as did Jesus of Nazareth some 500 years later. Pythagoras taught the esoteric sciences, the doctrine of reincarnation, and invented the word philosophe or philosopher, which literally means a friend of wisdom. We also term it a lover of wisdom. Plato continued and refined the work of philosophy. Lao Tse, which literally means the old sage, and Confucius performed this work in China, expounding principles of duty, humanity, the virtues, and ethical living. In India, Shankaracharya, one of the greatest teachers of Vedanta, who founded the philosophy of Advaita Vedanta, literally non-duality, H.P.B. referred to him as the greatest of the esoteric masters of India. And as I mentioned, Patanjali also appeared between 6 to 700 BC, principally to redefine and restore the philosophy and practice of yoga, Raja Yoga. We can generalize the work of all these great teachers and masters as expressing a universal and transcendent view of oneself and of life, which has left its mark on humanity ever since. Needless to say, in the last 2,000 years, there have been a long line of greater or lesser teachers and reformers who have all worked through the culture and religion of their own place and time. Briefly, we can quote the work of the Neoplatonic school of Alexandria, of whom one member, one exponent, Ammonius Saccas, coined the name Theosophia, or Theosophy, literally meaning divine wisdom. There was the Gnostic prophet Mani, founder of Manichaeism, who worked in Persia in the 3rd century AD and had an enormous influence across the whole of Europe and Asia for several centuries afterwards. More latterly came the Sufis, the Rosicrucians, the Masons, and a few well-known adepts, such as Le Comte de Saint-Germain, who worked in France in the second half of the 18th century. At the end of the 19th century, there occurred an important intersection of 3 cycles. This marked the end of the first 5,000 years of the Kali Yuga and the dawning of the new astrological age of Aquarius, as well as of the centennial cycle of the last quarter of every century. The significance of this extremely rare occurrence coincided with the founding of the modern Theosophical Movement in 1875. Ever since the 14th century, beginning with the Tibetan adept Tsongkhapa, who, as well as being the great reformer of the degenerated Buddhism of his own country, Tibet, initiated the centennial mission to the West in the last quarter of each century in order to reintroduce the teachings of the Eastern wisdom tradition in an inappropriate form, in order to fertilize and stimulate the philosophical thought and ideas needed for its further spiritual evolution. This was a collective effort by the Brotherhood of Adepts. This period saw not only the dawning of a new historical age, but the beginning of the end of the Piscean age and the decline of its institutions. At this juncture, H.P.B, as the Master's trusted direct agent, was sent to perform this important task at the beginning of a new cycle for humanity. H.P.B herself spoke of a new kind of thought that had arisen fostered by evolutionary forces, and yet it is identical with what was the keynote and the keystone of every century, especially the last one, that is the 18th century, absolute freedom of human thought. A word as old as the world, though new to you, has been sounded at the beginning of this cycle. This word being sounded is the sacred word Aum. And just to conclude with a couple of quotes, one from WQJ, he wrote, "Our movement is a reform one, dealing with the very character of the race, and therefore neither we nor the other members of the race are perfect." And the second quote, "Man is but a link in an endless chain of being, a sequence of a past eternity of causes and processes, a potentiality born into time, but spanning two eternities, his past and his future, and in his consciousness these are all one, duration, the ever-present." And now we shall have our second reading.
From a master of wisdom. It is divine philosophy alone, the spiritual and psychic blending of man with nature, which by revealing the fundamental truths that lie hidden under the objects of sense and perception, can promote a spirit of unity and harmony in spite of the great diversities of conflicting creeds. Theosophy therefore expects and demands from the fellows of the society great mutual toleration and charity for each other's shortcomings, ungrudging mutual help in the search for truths in every department of nature, moral and physical, and this ethical standard must be unflinchingly applied to daily life. Theosophy should not represent merely a collection of moral verities, a bundle of metaphysical ethics epitomized in theoretical dissertations. Theosophy must be made practical, and it has, therefore, to be disencumbered of useless digressions in the sense of desultory orations and fine talk. Let every theosophist only do his duty, that which he can and ought to do, and very soon the sum of human misery, within and around the areas of every branch of your society, will be found visibly diminished. Forget self, capitals, and working for others, and the task will become an easy and light one for you. Seek communion and intercourse only with the God within your own soul. Heed only the praise or blame of the deity which can never be separated from your true self, as it is verily that God itself, called the higher consciousness, capitals. Put without delay your good intentions into practice, never leaving a single one to remain, only an intention, expecting meanwhile neither reward nor even acknowledgement for the good you may have done. Reward and acknowledgement are in yourself and inseparable from you, as it is in your inner self alone which can appreciate them at their true degree and value.
From the writings of Robert Crosbie. Every thought is in regard to some thing and produces an image of that thing. The concentration of the thinker upon the matrix he has created draws into it the lives that swarm in the terrestrial atmosphere, energizes them and gives them direction according to the motive and desire of the thinker. This matrix, made a living force, can insidiously impel to action other thinkers, whose natures and desires are similar or who have the seeds of such desires within them. And all this, whether the creator of the matrix is conscious of the results or not. Thought, or more correctly, the ability to think, is the most powerful, creative, destructive, preservative, or regenerating agent that any beings possess. It acts weakly and strongly according to the knowledge and power of concentration of the thinker. In occultism, thought is the real plane of action. What we see or perceive physically are merely the effects of thought. From Answers to Questions on the Ocean of Theosophy, page 62 to 63.
And I'm doing the first part of the second talk. The talk itself is on theosophical influences on the 21st century. But as you probably know, the 21st century, we are only maybe in the 22 years of the 21st century, I think. So we'll definitely mention the influences from the 20th century as well as 21st century. So theosophical influences on the 21st century is what we are covering in this talk. In this talk in particular, we'll be covering the theosophical astral plane or astral light can be used to influence the mind of the race, and how this is really used in theosophy, and what's the meaning of astral light. We need to explain that as well. But before, if somebody can read this on the screen for me, please. Any volunteer?
I can read it for you.
Thank you.
The Theosophical Movement being continuous, it is to be found in all times and in all nations. Wherever thought has struggled to be free, wherever spiritual ideas, as opposed to forms and dogmatism, have been promulgated, there the great movement is to be discerned. William Q. Judge, series number 3.
Thank you very much. So this is saying that the Theosophical Movement, or Theosophy and the Theosophical Movement, is described as being timeless, ethical, ageless, moral, universal, invisible, and continuous, and has existed since the dawn of time, and its history can be traced back century by century, from one civilization to another, and they form the basis of all religions, the essence of all religions, and the basis of truth. So what will the influence of the Theosophical idea for the astral light? One of the axioms of Theosophy is that it is a law of occult dynamic that a given amount of energy expended on the spiritual or astral plane is productive of far greater results than the same amount expended on the physical objective plane of existence. And this is taken from Sacred Doctrine, Volume 1, page 644. What this really means is that the mind is the real plane of action, and that any action that takes place at the level of the mind can have a greater result. And this is why we are looking into the astral light, which represents the plane of thought for most of humanity, in order to try to see how influence can be effected from that plane. So what is the astral light. Theosophy teaches that there is such a thing as the existence of a unified, diffuse, and highly ethereal medium, which has been called the astral light and akasa. It is the repository of all past, present, and future events, and in it are recorded the effect of spiritual causes and of all acts and thoughts from this direction, from the direction of either spirit or matter, the elementals or energetic centers in it. This is from William Kijers from Epitome of Theosophy. And H.P.B explained what's the actual light in the Theosophical Glossary. She says, it is the invisible region that surrounds our globe as it does every other, and corresponding as the second principle of cosmos, the third being life, of which it is the vehicle, to the linga sharira or the astral double in man. A subtle essence visible only to a clairvoyant eye, and the lowest but one, viz. The earth, of the seven akashic or cosmic principles. Eliphas Levi calls it the great serpent, and the dragon from which radiates on humanity every evil influences. This is the same as the sidereal light of Paracelsus and other Hermetic philosophers. So what really is important here is that both man as a natural body, we coalesces with the astral body that surrounds our earthly plane, the nature in which we live, and that every thought that we develop coalesces with an elemental on that plane, the elementals being the energy center in that plane. So this interaction, so to speak, influence that plane, and that also is, and we are also influenced by all the thought energy on that plane. So basically, what Theosophy is saying here is that all our actions, emotions, thoughts, and deeds are actually recorded on that plane, and those thoughts being recorded there are also affect us in a certain way. So imagine the entire humanity thought being recorded on that plane. So that plane is both a recorder as well as transmitter of thought and action of the entire humanity. So if we draw a little bit of correspondence here, we can see how this is we are unconsciously being affected and storing images on that plane. So William Q. Judge, in the letter that have helped me, says that we have each one of us to make ourselves a center of light, a picture gallery from which shall be projected on the astral light such scenes, such influences, such thoughts as may influence many for good. Shall thoughts arouse a new current, and then finally result in drawing back the great and the good from other spheres from beyond the earth. And if you remember, when H.P.B was writing the Sacred Doctrine, she did mentions that the messages that she was getting from the custodian or from the masters of wisdom who helped her write the Sacred Doctrine, she was receiving those messages from the astral light. She said the message has to be seen in the astral light in Fasimal, and through that astral matrix, she precipitated those messages. So she said the message has to be seen in the astral light in Fasimals, and through that astral matrix, I precipitated all of it. This is on conversational occultism. We also put this just to say that the all ideal and concept of universal brotherhood, which the masters have been promulgating for this society, also has helped, the United Nations to promote the Declaration of Human Rights, which was done in 1948. So now we turn a bit into how philosophical ideas influence the world religions. This quote, taken from Isis Unveiled, Volume 1, page 560, says, "There never was nor can there be more than one universal religion, for there can be but one truth concerning God, like an immense chain whose upper end, the Alpha, remains invisibly emanating from a deity in statu absconditu. With every primitive theology, it encircles our globe in every direction. It leaves not even the darkest corner unvisited. Before the other end, the Omega, turns back on its way to be again received where it first emanated. On this divine chain was strung the esoteric symbology of every people." So basically, that the teaching, the knowledge of theosophy is called divine wisdom, and we find that in every religion on earth. So just 2 years after the death of H.P.B. in 1991, there was the World Parliament of Religion, which was held in Chicago in 1893, which was a very important event in world religious history, because it seems like this really never really happened at the and at the Congress. The Congress brought together Hindus, Buddhists, Christian, Presbyterian, Confucius, Shintoists, Muslim, Theosophists, and so many other people from different religious backgrounds together. Theosophy therefore anticipated the return or rediscovery of the Eastern wisdom, its religious system. So the Buddhists, the Hinduists, the Zoroastrianism, yoga philosophy, Jainism, Taoism, Zen, and helped to popularize the doctrine of karma and reincarnations in the Western world, and the existence of living human masters and adepts who are the custodian of the perennial wisdom teachings. This set the stage, and the 20th and 21st century witnessed unprecedented progress toward the internalizations of religious human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, again that I mentioned earlier, which was adopted by the United Nations in 1948, was a landmark document recognizing, among other things, several important religious rights to mankind. It also anticipated the so-called New Age movement, which helped to open up the mind of the race to the Eastern psychology and ideas and influences. In particular, greater environmental awareness came out of it, the danger of crass materialism and of mechanical and technical civilizations. It helped foster the right to freedom of thought, of conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change one's religions or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others and in public or private, to manifest his religions or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. Theosophy also anticipated the ideal of universal brotherhood, as I mentioned earlier, or united humanity, only partially exemplify and achieve, both after the major wars, the First and Second World War, in the form of the League of Nations, if you remember Thomas Paine, and the latter United Nations that was created. Now we're gonna look a little bit on how Theosophy anticipated the discovery and help brings new scientific discovery in our modern society. And the quote from Sacred Doctrine, Volume 1, 261 says, "Chemistry and physiology are the two great magicians of the future, who are destined to open the eyes of mankind to the great metaphysical truth." Chemistry and physiology are the two great magicians of the future, who are destined to open the eyes of mankind to the great physical truth. Sacred Doctrine, Volume 1, page 261. The Sacred Doctrine has been able to anticipate future scientific discovery and influence new modern scientific discoveries. Among many scientific discovery, we had four significant ones: the X-ray, discovery of X-ray, radioactivity, radium, and the electron, which convinced the scientific world that the task was only beginning, not ending. The work of Albert Einstein, which talk about energy equals mc squared, which means that energy is just dispersed matter, and matter is only concentrated energy. This is basically the theory which H.P.B mentioned many a time in her book. So that work of Einstein added recognition that mass or substance is equivalent to energy, and that time and space are integral part of the substance-energy continuum makeup of the universe. The divisibility of atoms. Atoms are divisible. So Isaac Newton confirming what H.P.B said on the subject. Atoms is divisible and must consist of particles or of subatoms. It is on the doctrine of the elusive nature of matter and the infinite divisibility of the atom that the whole science of occultism is built. Today there's a lot of talk about quantum entanglement. And quantum entanglement basically is basically the fact that if you take a particle which you divide into, regardless of the geographical location of that particle, if you act on one particle, which is, for instance, here in London, the other particles in New York will react the same way. So it focuses on the relationship or the property of that particle, and show really that time and space doesn't really have it's only a physical conception. So this, sorry I covered this very fast, but we need time to cover the second part. So I'll leave the second speaker to cover the second part of this talk. Thank you.
Great. Well, has presented in his talk, obviously directly influences my part of the talk. He has revisited what the astral light is and how information can be carried from, well, basically between all human beings, if only they are susceptible to it. And also on an unconscious level, it probably affects everyone. I am going to talk about theosophical influences on modern art, music, and literature. Well, I know that the topic of today's talk is on the theosophical influences on the 21st century. However, I'm going to go to the roots of certain movements in art, music, and literature that obviously gave birth, developed, and without which today's modern art or music or literature would not be possible, because it's all part of the process, and they gave the impulse to further developments. So I'm not sure whether you can recognize this geometrical design that's right here. This is Pete Mondrian's artwork, and I'm going to use him as an example of how theosophical teachings were used and expressed his inner development. Okay, so here we've got art. Pete Mondrian, together with Vasily Kandinsky, are particularly important. Obviously, I can't say that the other two, Paul Klee and Paul Gauguin, I suppose. You can correct my pronunciation. My French is not great. Are also very, very famous. However, I will not have enough time to talk about all of them or give examples of their works. So I'm going to just focus on Pete Mondrian and perhaps speak a little bit about Kandinsky as well. Kandinsky and Mondrian are considered two chief founders of modern abstract art. In both cases, their evolution as artists took them from realism through impressionism and expressionism to abstract art. It was the study of theosophy that enabled them to make this revolutionary leap into abstraction. And yes, well, abstract art has its fans and so, well, almost enemies, because there are people who are not that keen on abstract art. Many people might say, oh, it's a bit rubbish, or I could do the same thing. Well, perhaps what you can see right here on this slide is my go at creating something that resembles work of Mondrian and Kandinsky, especially here. Now, the difference between Kandinsky and this piece of work is that I didn't have any deeper concept or thought when I was creating it. I was simply using those ideas that I observed in the art of Kandinsky. And the whole presentation is in the style of Mondrian, just because I copied his style. However, it's very important that there is a thought behind it. There will be those works would be ruled by certain proportion, certain ratio, that obviously will be absolutely known to the creator and will try to appeal to the viewer's intuition more than anything else. And this now becomes spiritual. I'm going to show you some work of Pete Mondrian. So we'll get back to this presentation in a second, because it's hard to talk about art without actually seeing it. So I've just mentioned that, as you can see, Pete Mondrian started as a realistic painter, and gradually his work moved towards impressionism, and then towards expressionism, which is still realism in a way, but obviously using very bright colors in order to make this very strong impression on the viewers. And we can see, for example, this triptych, Evolution, very significant. It was painted shortly after the painter got in contact with theosophical teachings. So we've got someone who's asleep, becomes spiritually awake, and then is conscious or consciously continues on his journey. And then we've got those works, those famous geometrical works by Mondrian that actually made him famous. And well, yes, this is just to let you know what I'm talking about. Now, I leave this website here, as I'm going to read just a few quotes directly from Pete Mondrian and how he tries to explain the spiritual aspect of his work. It's probably not easy to be original. It takes a lot of experience and serious self-examination. You need to know what you are doing before you can start trying to shake off tradition. You can't call yourself an atheist without having actually experienced religion of some kind. By not wishing to say anything human, by completely ignoring oneself, the artwork that emerges becomes a monument to beauty, transcending the human, and yet human in its depth and universality. To me, it is certain that this is the art of the future. Well, these are his words. I would say it's probably the art of the present and the past as well, especially if we think of, for example, Islamic spiritual art, or talking about Diwali. I know that many people celebrate Diwali around these days now. Rangoli patterns, those kaleidoscopic patterns aimed to represent the order, the geometry of the universe. So this is where we go. Perhaps one more quote. Just as the new art is now manifested amid the art of the past, prolonged in our time, we see that new life being born. While liberating itself from natural oppression, it frees itself from the domination of particular form of every kind and seeks the realization of pure and equivalent relationships. I think this is particularly important about the freedom of thought. It's very, very important to be able to experiment, to search deep in our unconscious in order to bring it into this up to the surface and becomes aware of it and experiment. And perhaps this one, pure abstract vision contains the perception of reality in its universal aspect. This aspect is not accumulation of forms, but the dynamic movement which makes living the forms. And this is particularly important when we talk about later work by Kandinsky. I'm just going to move through those realistic paintings very quickly because this is what I'm really trying to focus on. Oh yes, here we go. Here we go. So we've got especially those ones here, as you can see. They are very conceptual. They've got lots of lines, lots of different shapes. Now, for Kandinsky, it was not an accident. He didn't just use a few lines to express certain ideas, as I did preparing the presentation. He clearly was impressed and influenced by the discovery of the subatomic structures. And he said very clearly that the destruction of the atom to my soul was equal to the destruction of the world. Suddenly, the heaviest walls broke down. Everything became uncertain, tottering, and soft. I would not have been surprised if a stone had dissolved in the air in front of me and become invisible. Science seemed to me to have been destroyed. Its most important basis was but an illusion, an error of the scientists who did not build their celestial structures with a steady hand, stone by stone, but were rather feeling for truth, unguided in the dark, and blindly misinterpreted one item as another. Obviously, Kandinsky was particularly interested in the following idea in the Secret Doctrine in volume 1. It is on the doctrine of the elusive nature of matter and the infinite divisibility of the atom that the whole science of occultism is built, and I think simply move on. Now, let's move on to music. We've got 3 representatives of artists, composers that were deeply influenced by the Theosophical teachings. Gustav Mahler, Alexander Scriabin, John Sibelius. Okay, now Mahler received little attention as a composer during his lifetime. His symphonies and other compositions were in advance of their time and were received with puzzlement rather than acclaim. He prophesies, "My time will come," and so it has. He is now regarded as a great artist and a great master. Although his earlier symphonies are tragic in character and disclose bitter disillusionment with life, the third was titled The Joyful Knowledge, and according to noted Mahler authority, Derek Cook, indicated a newfound optimism, or rather a kind of mystical revelation of the validity and purpose of existence. So what was this joyful knowledge? I dare to suggest it was his contact with theosophical teachings again. I'm very much aware of the time, so I'm not going to perhaps play the first video clip. However, I'm very happy to share this presentation with you so you can watch it later. And basically, the very important element was the expression of yoga as the union of everything in the universe. So he would be, his symphonies would be very long. They would have sounds that would imitate the sounds of natures. For example, bird singing or the movement of trees, falling leaves, and so on and so forth. And here we've got a piece, a very famous piece by Alexander Scriabin. After his contact with theosophy, Scriabin's work became permeated with mystical undertones. Musicologist Gerald Abram contrasts the composer's first orchestral work, a piano concerto composed in the century after 1896-97, with the composer's greatest composition, his symphonic tone poem, and I am not going to read it in French, but basically it's Prometheus, the poem of fire. Yes, written in 1909-1910, and this is how he comments on it. It seems hardly credible that in only 13 years, a composer could have evolved from graceful, elegant, rather Chopinesque concerto to a work which was regarded in his day as in the very front of the avant-garde. Well, I'm not going to play too much of it. Oh, I'm not sure whether I actually shared the sound. So actually, no, I'm going to leave it and I'm going to move on because you can enjoy it later. It's a very long piece. It's 22. It's 22 minutes long, but I can kind of understand those mystical undertones that this musicologist was talking about. Please have a look and have a listen later. And I think it's going to. Now this one starts. Okay, here we go. And literature. Many writers and poets, especially in the 20th century, after the Theosophical Movement gained its momentum, were highly influenced by those teachings. Very, very impressed by the character of H.P.B. and other Theosophists. I can mention Yeats, Russell, Joyce from Ireland, London, Forster, Lawrence, Eliot from the USA, Maria Rosa da Luna from Spain, and Julius Verne from France, just to mention a few. Now, some of them might be Nobel Prize winners, however, they were not initiates. So obviously, you can find elements of theosophical thought in the works, but just as this one that I've prepared for you. However, yes, they might have only studied theosophy for a few years. The impact stayed with them till the rest of their lives. So, for example, Yeats became an active member of the Dublin Theosophical Society after reading Sinnett's Occult World and Esoteric Buddhism. and its predecessor, the Hermetic Society, of which he was chairman. Now, Richard Ellman, quoting from his biography, Yeats, The Man and the Mask, wrote, "Theosophy had furnished him with shield and sword, and he went forth like Don Quixote, though with some hesitancy, to tilt at the windmills of modern life, notwithstanding his final excommunication, 5 or 6 years of theosophy, three of them years of active membership under the organization's founder, had left their mark on Yeats. A vision," this poem that this extract was taken from, is full of connections with theosophy. But obviously there were more. There was James Joyce and Eliot and so on and so forth. I'm going to leave it here. We've taken 10 extra minutes, so my apologies, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you for that. So we'll now have the fourth reading, and it's from William Judge. I'll share screens so we can read it together. It starts with a question: what is a Neo-Manichaea? Judge answers, such is one of the appellations given to an adept who, in order to devote himself to mankind, has consciously given up his right to pass into nirvana. He has no material body, but possesses all the other principles. And for such an one, space is no obstacle. There are many of them, and they perform various works. Some take full possession of great reformers or statesmen who carry on a beneficial policy. Others overshadow sometimes several persons, causing them to speak, act, and write in such a way as to produce needed changes in their fellow men. These Neo-Manichaeas pass through the haunts of men unseen and unknown. Only the effects of their influence and presence are perceived. And these results are attributed to the genius of the individual or to chance alone. As a change in the thought of a people who have been tending to gross atheism is one always desired by the sages of the wisdom religion, it may be supposed that the wave of spiritualistic phenomena resulting now quite clearly in a tendency back to a universal acknowledgement of the soul has been aided by the Neo-Manichaeas. They are in it and of it. They push on the progress of a psychic deluge over great masses of people. The result is seen in literature, the religion, and the drama of today. Slowly but surely, the tide creeps up and covers the once dry shore of materialism. And, though priests may howl, demanding the suppression of theosophy with a firm hand, and the venal press may try to help them, they have neither the power nor the knowledge to produce one backward ripple. For the master hand is guided by omniscient intelligence, propelled by a gigantic force, and works behind the scene. So those were taken from Judge's answers to questioners and echoes from the Orient, which is great little book. So we'll now have the fifth reading.
This is from the writings of H.P. Blavatsky. On the day when Theosophy will have accomplished its most holy and most important mission, namely to unite firmly a body of men of all nations in brotherly love and bent on a pure altruistic work, not on a labor with selfish motives, on that day only will Theosophy become higher than any nominal brotherhood of man. Theosophists are of necessity the friends of all movements in the world, whether intellectual or simply practical, for the amelioration of the condition of mankind. As individuals, we may engage in any charitable or altruistic work, but as Theosophists, we have a larger, more important, and much more difficult work to do. The function of Theosophists is to open men's hearts and understandings to charity, justice, and generosity, attributes which belong specifically to the human kingdom and are natural to man when he has developed the qualities of a human being. Theosophy teaches the animal man to be a human man. And when people have learned to think and feel as truly human beings should feel and think, they will act humanely, and works of charity, justice, and generosity will be done spontaneously by all. Therefore, it is that the ethics of Theosophy are even more necessary to mankind than the scientific aspects of the psychic facts of nature and man. The latter relate wholly to the material and evanescent part of the septenary man, but the ethics sink into and take hold of the real man, the reincarnating ego. We are outwardly creatures of but a day. Within we are eternal. Learn then well the doctrines of karma and reincarnation, and teach, practice and promulgate that system of life and thought which alone can save the coming races. That's taken from 5 messages from H.P. Blavatsky to the American Theosophists.
Thank you. We now have time for questions to be asked of our speakers. Type them in the sidebar if you like, or just simply ask them. Unmute yourself and ask what you think is important.
Well, I had a question about the first talk. That all the figures that you mentioned, Krishna, Buddha, Pythagoras, Lao-Tzu, they were all reformers in some way. Well, we know that Jesus was a reformer of Judaism.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Buddha did the same function actually for Hinduism. So that seems to be a common trait. That very much stood out from me when you said it. Could you say the same thing about H.P.B? that she was trying to reform. But it was more than religion, though, wasn't it, for H.P.B? What do you think?
Most definitely, she was a reformer, but not just in religion, but across the whole board. I mean, the science, religion, philosophy, metaphysics. The 19th century has been described as the most materialistic in history, and the religion.
We tend to forget that.
The also the ethics had declined. There had been a flowering in the 18th century, the so-called Age of Enlightenment, and there were several living adepts in the world, as was mentioned as the Comte de Saint-Germain, the Comte de Saint-Martin, and the Masonic brotherhoods were very active in society, and particularly in the arts, and so it was a real flowering in a sense. And it ended with the Great Revolution. I mean, revolutions, or the principle of the rights of man being put into practice. The famous work of Thomas Paine was adopted by both in America and in France, and tried to put into practice the principles that he expounded, which was something quite new and revolutionary for that time. But in the 19th century, there seemed to be a kind of stasis set in again, complacency, class conflict and separation, and a lot of social injustices, which perhaps could have been avoided by implementing the idealism of the 18th century. So she really had, or Theosophy really had an enormous task to achieve, to also counteract the arrogance and the narrow-mindedness of academia, of science, which was proceeding down the lines of pure materialism, away from the concepts of the soul, of non-materiality or spiritual reality of life. So we can see that she often was at loggerheads with the institutions of the great religious institutions, but also she didn't sit back from actually criticizing the corruption and the injustices of her age, social injustices particularly.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, thank you. In the second talk mentioned the huge change that came about in social ethics, particularly in things like the Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, maybe you'll say something a little bit more about the ethical side of the theosophical reform.
Sure. I think Theosophy is basically the focus of the Theosophical teaching is always ethical. It's always telling that every man from every race have something about them in lower nature, which is selfish, which is separating, which is not unifying, which is materialistic, so to speak, materialistic thinking, and therefore Theosophy always call for the opposite of all this. So unselfishness, altruism, unselfish philanthropy, self-observation, self-introspection, brotherly love,
yes,
mutual help, universal fraternity, which is really one of the first object of the of the Theosophical Society, which is the universal brotherhood, basically. So there's an insistence on those aspects, and there's a very good reason for it, because it's aligned with man's moral nature, and I think this brought about some changes in the West, some awareness to that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well put. So there
We could say that all this is really the true Christian teaching, as taught by Jesus in the Gospels, but was largely ignored or not put into practice over the last 2,000 years. So, but it also implies the concept of duty, that we have a duty to our fellow man, but also to all our fellow creatures, and to nature itself, as designated stewards of this creation. Again, another duty which we have sorely or sadly neglected.
Yes, we wrote about that in the last newsletter. But there are some very good scientists now who are speaking out against the exploitation of the animals, the destruction of the environment. David Attenborough has been doing a tremendous amount to raise people's awareness of the effects of pollution on just marine life, those types of things, and that we must take a more responsible attitude to how we consume. You know, we often quote a famous anthropologist who worked with the chimpanzees, and she said that most of the problems that we're getting now with things like coronavirus have come from the destruction of the natural environment, and that humanity is too greedy, and you know, we're taking away the animals' environment and encroaching so far on them that they begin to transmit the viruses to us, which would normally be quite safe for those animals, but they jump species and that type of thing. But what about some questions from everybody? Do type them in the chat box. If you've got any questions on the third talk on art or music. Yes, Jane Goodall, that's right. She's if you have a look in the newsletter, it's on the website. There's an article about Jane Goodall.
Actually, Jennifer has in the side box, we need to live in the world without hurting it. And it reminds me of some of the paintings that in which material nature was being exploded, or that is to say, the painting seemed to show things coming apart. And I think she mentioned that the author of the painting felt as if, because of science sort of indiscriminately using energy sources, etc., where things in front of him could just disappear. That's how he felt, and so he was showing it in terms of art.
But this is all the result of science divorcing itself from ethics and morality, even philosophy, which had begun in the 19th century, but almost flowered with the development of the atomic bomb and the power to destroy the world. You see, which is the total opposite of what everything Theosophy stands for, or everything that all the highest religious teachings in the world, taught. So something went seriously wrong. You see.
Yes, but don't forget, the Mahatma was right that science is their great ally. You see, because you need science. What is science, philosophically speaking? it's just a knowledge of how nature works. So science holistically is a very good thing, and I mean, what you said earlier was true, is that the materialistic science is exploitative. But we mustn't write off science altogether, you see, because it's a very powerful, it can be a very powerful force for good. I mean, it lifts people out of poverty, able to feed everybody, and those things are not possible without good science.
Well, there's a prophecy from H.P.B, isn't there, that in a few centuries more, all the world's religions would disappear as in their current formats or states, and there would be a new synthesis of science and religion, but on a higher vibration, a higher echelon.
Yes.
So it will be, the science will bring knowledge and understanding to religious concepts such as the soul and after-death states and so on, and the divinity. But the religion will bring humanity and dignity to the science. So you're right, they are actually two sides of the same coin, but they have to be reunited together again.
Yes. Are there other questions from folks listening? Folks who haven't spoken would like to ask a question.
There's some typing going on.
Yes.
Do use the microphones. Yeah.
Hello there. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to mention that I think hopefully our understanding of reality will somehow reconcile what scientific or materialistic scientific approach has achieved by now with ethics and philosophy and all that. Because I think that the fact that they seem to be quite apart is because we do not really, the science itself do not really understand reality, and it's trying to do it. But it's going to take some time, I guess. It's just a comment.
Yes, I would agree. It's really not science per se, it's the scientists who, thinking humans like the rest of us,
exactly,
looking into nature to see what's going on, would need to not convince themselves of what they're seeing too quickly, seems to me. And Zora has typed, I worked for a man who expressed his amazement at the power of the atomic bomb, and he marveled at the creation of such a powerful force. I felt compelled to point out that it wasn't a very good example of humankind's ability to create, being quite the opposite, in fact. I'm reminded of what was presented in the second talk regarding physics of Einstein, in which he was explaining the relationship of energy to matter, EMC squared. So there's a basis to it which could be used practically, allowed to run amok and become unbelievably destructive.
Well, I think we've come to the end of time.
Indeed.
Just about. Should we just finish with the thought, one of the thoughts from the front page of the program? We are not working merely that people may call themselves Theosophists, but that the doctrines we cherish may affect and leaven or lift up the whole mind of this century and coming centuries. So we should be really appreciative of all that was done to give out this ancient wisdom again and resuscitate it for our times.
Yes, and let me say in closing that this was a fine, deliberate discussion of such interesting ideas regarding theosophical thought and its relationship to the world, music, philosophy, science. And then let me remind everyone that the meeting coming up this Tuesday is the study of the Dhammapada, and the key to Theosophy, Wednesday, the secret doctrine. And then the next meeting on Sunday, November 22nd, will be the second part of our discussion on karma. And thank you all very much for attending.
Well, thank you for sharing. Thank everyone for reading and doing those excellent talks. See you all very soon, I hope. Good night.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Yes.
Have a good week.
Good night.